Let's talk about some Leafs trades, shall we? Hello and welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, hi, welcome. I promise I don't usually film in my pyjamas, but it's trade deadline day and it is currently around 10:30 p.m. at night here in Scotland, which means that yes, I have my pyjamas on, yes, I have a glass of wine, but let's break down the Leafs trades because I enjoyed today's trade deadline a hell of a lot. I love the trade deadline, it's no surprise. I made a video earlier this week breaking down some of my predictions or possibilities that the Leafs might get. I also shared what players I would like to have seen the Leafs get the most, and this included the likes of Brayden Schenn, Scott Laughton, Yanni Gourde, Trent Frederick and Brock Nelson, just to talk about the centres. That was sort of my list. And of course a couple of those, like Frederick, he kind of went quite quickly. But I felt like the Leafs were going to do something this year. And I know they haven't done the biggest blockbuster trade because nothing was going to beat Brad Marchand going to Florida. I don't think anybody really saw that one coming. But as a Leafs fan, I'm feeling pretty good right now. So let's talk about what the Leafs have done, shall we? Let's talk about whether it's going to be enough, whether they got exactly what they needed, whether they spent too much, or whether they got a good deal. So the Leafs were off to a very quiet start this trade deadline. It seemed like Brad Treliving was not doing anything too quickly, which, you know what, is smart. It pans out in the long run. It felt like everyone was just waiting for something to happen, and at one point it felt like that was never going to come. And at a certain point today I did think, like, will the Leafs just do nothing? But realistically, teams that are going after a cup always make changes at the trade deadline. It's the only way that you can truly make sure that you're still in contention going into the postseason, is to make sure that you round out the areas which need improvement and you make additions where it's needed. So deep down I knew that the Leafs would do something, but I was getting a little impatient and I was hoping that Brad was just cooking in the kitchen and he was taking his sweet time, making sure it was good. But I was concerned for a little while. Of course, the Leafs had already placed Ryan Reaves on waivers. This was completely unsurprising. He's been a frequent healthy scratch for the Leafs this season. He's had no goals this year and he's had very little on-ice impact. Most of the impact that Ryan Reaves has had this year has been in terms of the locker room. He seems like a great presence to have, but ultimately that isn't what wins you a cup, especially when you're taking up 1.18 million in cap space. It was also unlikely that any team was going to pick him up. I think the aim was always that you'd send him down to the minors and you would bury a lot of that cap space, which of course $1.15 million of it you can bury down in the minors, which frees up some much needed cap space for the Leafs because they were lacking in cap space. They always are. Cap management is always an issue for the Leafs, especially for a team who has so much money wrapped up in their core group. And this year was no different. They still have got cap problems, but they've managed to navigate it well enough. Ryan Reaves going on waivers was a no-brainer. I mean, I know the guy is great for like hyping up the team. I know he's good in terms of morale, but at a certain point, when there's no purpose past that, I feel like you have to kind of move on from it, for now anyway, because that doesn't win you a cup. And at this point in the season, the cup is all you're thinking about. The postseason is what you're thinking about. And you need people who are like going to be performing on the ice and be impactful in terms of performance. So Ryan Reaves was not that. But I mean, I think that's a pretty common thought, is that he wasn't that anymore. So he goes on waivers and of course he does get sent down. No one picks him up. I believe everyone that went on waivers yesterday did clear, so nobody was picking up people off waivers. Everyone was just going down in the minors, and Ryan Reaves was no different. So then eventually, it is going on 6 o'clock my time, which is 1 p.m. Eastern time, of course. And there was finally news. The Leafs did something. They made a trade. And it was a fantastic one at that, and it was one that I was really hoping for. Scott Laughton to the Toronto Maple Leafs from the Philadelphia Flyers. This was in exchange for Nikita Grabenkin and a conditional first round pick in 2027. The Leafs also received a 4th round pick and a 6th round pick in this trade, and there was 50% retention, which is really good. He of course has a $3 million cap hit, so 50% being retained of that is amazing news for the Leafs, and it definitely was viable for them. To me, this is a win. Laughton was one of the top players that I wanted the Leafs to get in terms of a centre. I know that Braden Shen was sort of top of the list in terms of to get, but he came with a much heftier price tag, and even though he definitely brings more value than perhaps Laughton, I'm really happy with Scott Laughton being a Toronto Maple Leaf. He of course is from the Toronto area. I always like the hometown enthusiasm that brings. I think that can be a real asset to a player joining a team, and it's always very exciting to see that. His Last Supper recreation picture also made me instantly be like, this guy's a vibe, we need this guy. Scott Laughton is a much needed 3C for the Leafs. They needed depth down the middle to go behind Matthews and Tavares, and that is exactly what they've got. In 60 games this season, Laughton has 11 goals and 16 assists, totaling 27 points for the year. He's a power forward, he's a versatile guy who can be moved further up if needed. Injuries happen, lines can change, you never know. But first and foremost, he fills that important 3C that was much needed for the Leafs. It was a gap that was almost essential that they fill. Heading into this trade deadline, it was definitely a 3C and a defenseman. They needed depth in the back end, and they needed a 3C as well. Of course they did lose Grabenkin, and I mean, I like Grabenkin, of course I do, the guy seems great. However, he's actually less of a loss for Laughton than I initially thought it might be. The fact they were able to keep Cowan, Minton, we'll get to that, and Danford was an absolute win, I think, for somebody who is as high quality as what Scott Laughton is. Grabenkin was a prospect with, he had good potential, but he was never projected to be, like one of your top guys, one of your top players. And ultimately, I think he was the perfect chess piece in this trade. And even though, of course, it sucks to see your prospects go, of course it does, but the price of trades was so high this year, I felt like everything was just so expensive. I saw the Gourde and Bjorkstrand trade and for Tampa, and that one seemed pretty expensive. Some of the other ones as well, like the price just seemed crazy for some of these players this year. It was absolutely a seller's market. So losing Grabenkin to me wasn't that big of a deal, if I'm honest. I think it could have been a lot worse. The first round pick was almost a certainty, unfortunately, as well, within that cost. I think overall it's a great trade for the Leafs. I think they've really come out on top with it. I think Scott Laughton is a fantastic addition. I think he can make a real difference both for the remainder of the season and going into the postseason. I think he's exactly what the Leafs needed. I felt really, really happy with it, and the more I thought about it, the more I was like, this is great. Like, Brad has done something great here. I really, really like this. And then it was just a waiting game, because of course there were still a couple hours left until the trade deadline at that point. And even though getting centre depth is great, the Leafs also really needed a defenseman. They needed some depth on the back end, and it just seemed like we were waiting to see if they were going to do anything else. It seemed like they were done at one point, like maybe it was going to be a one and done kind of trade deadline. And then right as the trade deadline hit at 8 p.m, 3 p.m. Eastern time, of course, a last minute trade, the details just continued to trickle out well after the deadline had passed, and it was announced that the Boston Bruins, of all teams, were trading Brandon Carlo to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a package which included Fraser Minton, the 28-year-old right-handed defenseman, which is a big deal, by the way, because right-handed defenseman, perfect. He is a great addition to the penalty kill, as well as adding defensive depth. He doesn't have much in terms of offensive ability. He only has 1 goal and 8 assists this season, But the Leafs have their goal scorers, they have their offensive talent, especially with the addition of Laughton. That's not what they were looking for. They were looking for depth on the back end, and that is exactly what Carlo can provide for them. I didn't really have Carlo on my radar the same way that I did with Laughton, obviously. Laughton was one of the most talked about potential trade targets for the Leafs. I did see Carlo mentioned. He was high up in the rankings in some articles that I read, but I just didn't think a trade between Boston and Toronto was likely. They're not very likely trade partners. Even though the Atlantic Division trades, we'll touch on that in a second. I also thought he would be perhaps really costly as well. He's still really young, of course. And once again, I feel like this is a good deal. It ticks all the boxes of what the Leafs were looking for. It's exactly what they needed. We had a 3-team trade scenario going on here. The Leafs received Carlo, Boston received a Leafs first round pick along with Fraser Minton, while the Pittsburgh Penguins received Connor Dewar and Connor Timmins. Connor Dewar, I knew he wasn't going to be a Toronto Maple Leaf after today. There was no chance. The guy has played like 29 games this season. His ice time average is quite low. There was no way he was going to be a Leaf after today. And it was absolutely the right choice to move him and Timmins too. The Bruins have retained 15% of Carlo's salary, which brings his cap hit to around $3.5 million for the next 2 years. Brandon Carlo can be a great fit for Morgan Rielly. At minimum, I feel like Carlo is a great defensive depth piece, but more likely, he's more than that and he can bring more value to the table. And I think he's worth that kind of price tag. I think he's worth the money, and I especially think he's worth it when it's allowed the Leafs to fill every bit of criteria that they had essentially going into today. There were some other options the Leafs could have gone for defensively, but ultimately I think Carlo could bring more than what a lot of those other potential trade targets could have. Overall, I think the Leafs have done exactly what they had to this deadline, no more and no less. They were looking for a 3C and a defenseman. They've got exactly that. I know the prices do seem a little high in some respects, but as I say, the price of everything this year, seller's market, it was just so high that I feel like the Leafs still got a really good deal out of both of these trades. I don't feel like they gave up too much particularly. I, of course, biasly of course, really wanted Easton Cowan to stay on the team, so I'm very happy that he's still around. Same with Ben Danford, of course. I was really impressed with Brad Treliving this trade deadline. I think he did a fantastic job. Full credits to him. He's really rounded out this Leafs team in a way that was very necessary without, I don't think, too much of a cost. I guess my only concern after today is the fact that the Atlantic Division still seems stronger than ever, and with Brad Marchand now going to Florida, which completely blindsided me. I would never have seen that coming. I didn't see that coming at all. I feel like Florida look like an absolute powerhouse again. Florida, of course, have been amazing lately. They are currently top of the division, above the Leafs, only by a point, I believe, but they are still above the Leafs right now. But not only are Florida a true threat, but Tampa have also really got some momentum going, and they also look fantastic now after this trade deadline. So I do feel a little bit apprehensive about the fact that the Leafs, potential first round matchup will be a really good team again. I mean, it was inevitable really. Both Florida and Tampa just look so good once again. It's so frustrating. I feel like the Leafs do look much stronger, but so are Florida and so are Tampa. And so is it going to be the same issues that the Leafs run into once again? Well, let's wait and see. I don't want to jump the gun at all, but it is insane how good both Florida and Tampa are looking, and it scares me. It does. And Brad Marchand in a Florida jersey also kind of scares me, I won't lie. So those are my thoughts for the 2024-2025 NHL trade deadline in terms of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm very happy with how it went. I feel like it's really just added some good finishing touches to the team, a team which at its core is fundamentally very good this year, of course, but there were a couple areas where they were lacking, and I feel like they have now filled those areas to the best of their ability. So I'm really excited to see what comes next. I'm excited to see the two new guys playing for the team. I think it's going to be really fun. And now it's time to look at the postseason, I guess. It's like 6 weeks away, which is insane. I feel like this season has gone by so quickly. And yeah, just it's crazy how time flies when you're having fun and supporting the Toronto Maple Leafs. And before I ramble any further, I'm going to wrap it up here because I want to go edit this video really quickly, as quick as I can, and get this video out tonight. And then also get some sleep because it's already super late and I haven't even started editing yet. So maybe I'll get to sleep at some point. That would be nice. I am really tired, hence the pyjamas. So let me know in the comments, what do you think of this year's trade deadline? Do you think the Leafs have done enough? How do you feel about them moving into the postseason? Let me know your thoughts, I want to hear them. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and also like this video if you did enjoy it. It means the world to me. Thank you so much for watching and I'll be back soon with more hockey chats from across the pond. Bye guys.